4 years into what I thought was my marriage, my husband Derek looked me straight in the eye over his morning coffee and said the words that would change everything. "You have 9 days to convince me you are worth keeping as my wife." I sat there, stunned, coffee mug halfway to my lips, wondering if this was some cruel joke. But Derek was never one for jokes. What he did not expect was that on day one of his twisted ultimatum, I would walk into a coffee shop and meet someone who would show me exactly what I was worth. Before I tell you how this wild journey unfolded, let me know where you are watching from and hit that like button if you have ever felt undervalued in a relationship. Trust me, you will want to stick around to see how this turned out, because what happened next changed everything. To understand how devastating Derek's ultimatum was, you need to know what my life had become. 4 years earlier, I married Derek, thinking I had found my prince charming. He was a successful lawyer, drove a BMW, lived in a beautiful apartment overlooking the city. When we first met at a networking event, he swept me off my feet with expensive dinners and weekend getaways. He seemed so confident, so put together, everything I thought I wanted in a partner. But somewhere along the way, the fairy tale turned into a nightmare I did not even recognize I was living. Derek had this way of making everything seem like it was for my own good. When he suggested I stop going out with my college friends because they were a bad influence, I thought he was just looking out for me. When he convinced me to quit my job at the marketing firm to pursue freelance writing from home, saying he could support us both, it felt romantic. When he started commenting on my weight, my clothes, the way I styled my hair, telling me he just wanted me to be the best version of myself, I believed him. Slowly, methodically, Derek isolated me from everyone and everything that made me feel confident. My freelance writing career struggled because I was too anxious to pitch to new clients, too afraid of rejection, after Derek constantly pointed out my failures. I gained 20 pounds from stress eating and barely leaving the apartment. My once vibrant social life dwindled to nothing because Derek always had a reason why I should not go out. My family lived 3 states away, and Derek discouraged visits, saying we could not afford the travel. By the time Derek delivered his ultimatum that Monday morning, I had become a shadow of the woman I used to be. I was 32 years old, financially dependent on a man who made me feel worthless, isolated from friends and family, and convinced that maybe I really was not good enough. The list Derek handed me after his 9-day announcement was typed up like a business contract. Lose 15 pounds. Earn at least $3,000 this month from your writing. Cook dinner every night. Stop being so negative and depressed all the time. Improve your appearance. Maybe actually try with makeup and clothes. The final item on the list still makes my stomach turn. Be more grateful for everything I provide for you. I stared at that list, and for the first time in months, something stirred inside me. Not the usual self-doubt and shame Derek's words normally triggered, but something else. A tiny spark of anger maybe, or confusion about when exactly I had agreed to audition for love I thought I already had. That afternoon, I grabbed my laptop and headed to Downtown Brew, a coffee shop I used to frequent before Derek started discouraging me from spending money on coffee I could make at home. I needed to get out of the apartment, away from that list taped to the refrigerator, and try to figure out how to earn $3,000 in a month when my writing income had been practically non-existent. I chose a corner table near the window and opened my laptop, trying to focus on potential freelance opportunities. But my mind kept drifting back to Derek's cold expression as he delivered his ultimatum, the way he had looked at me like I was an employee who was not meeting performance standards rather than his wife. That is when I noticed someone at the table next to mine reading a book about photography. He was probably in his late 20s with kind eyes and an easy smile. When our eyes met, he did not look away uncomfortably like most people do when you catch them glancing. Instead, he smiled warmly. Marcus, as I would learn his name, was struck up a conversation when he noticed I was writing in a notebook alongside my laptop work. "What are you working on?" he asked, And something about the genuine interest in his voice made me actually answer honestly instead of deflecting like I had learned to do. I told him about my freelance writing, how I was trying to build up my client base. He listened intently, asked thoughtful questions about what kind of writing I enjoyed most, whether I had considered pitching to publications I was passionate about, rather than just chasing whatever paid the most. It was the first real conversation I had had with another adult in months. Marcus shared that he was an elementary school teacher who also did photography on the side, showing me some of his work on his phone. His photographs captured ordinary moments in extraordinary ways. A child's laughter during recess morning light streaming through classroom windows, the concentration on students' faces as they worked on art projects. Everything he photographed seemed to glow with warmth and authenticity. We talked for 2 hours. 2 hours where I felt like myself again, where someone was interested in my thoughts and opinions without judging or correcting them. When I finally looked at my phone and realized how long we had been talking, I panicked slightly about getting home before Derek. As I packed up my laptop, Marcus asked if I came to this coffee shop often. I found myself saying yes, even though it had been months since my last visit. Something about him made me want to return to this feeling of being seen and heard. Walking home, I realized I had not once thought about Derek's list during those 2 hours with Marcus. For the first time since receiving that ultimatum, I felt something other than anxiety and self-doubt. I felt curious about what tomorrow might bring. The second day of Derek's countdown began with him checking my progress, like a supervisor reviewing quarterly reports. Had I researched gyms? What was my plan for losing 15 pounds in 8 days? How many writing queries had I sent out? I showed him the 3 article pitches I had sent the day before, which he reviewed critically, before noting they probably would not amount to much. I spent the morning at the cheapest gym I could find, pushing myself through a workout routine I had not attempted in years. My body ached, but not as much as my pride did, when I caught glimpses of myself in the mirrors surrounded by people who actually knew what they were doing. By afternoon, I was exhausted and discouraged. My article pitches had all been rejected with form emails. My body hurt from the morning workout, and Derek had left another note reminding me I now had 7 days left. I found myself walking back to downtown Brew almost without conscious decision. Marcus was there again, grading papers at the same table. When he looked up and saw me, his face lit up in a way that made my chest feel tight with some emotion I could not quite name. "You look tired," he said, not critically, but with genuine concern. Rough day, I found myself telling him about the gym disaster, how out of place I had felt, how everything seemed harder than it used to be. Marcus listened without offering solutions or judgment. Then he said something that stopped me cold. "You know, being healthy has nothing to do with punishing yourself. When was the last time you did something physical that actually felt good? I could not remember." Derek's criticism had made me afraid of trying new things, afraid of looking foolish or failing publicly. Marcus suggested we take a walk around the park nearby instead of sitting in the coffee shop, just to get some fresh air and movement that did not feel like punishment. Central Park was beautiful that late afternoon. Marcus pointed out things I had stopped noticing. The way the light filtered through the leaves, how peaceful the pond looked with ducks gliding across the surface, the sound of children playing in the distance. As we walked, I felt tension leaving my shoulders that I had not even realized I was carrying. We ended up sitting on a bench overlooking the water, and Marcus asked me about my writing dreams. Not my freelance hustle, but what I actually wanted to write about if money was not a factor. I heard myself talking about ideas I had buried under Derek's practicality lectures. A novel about women finding their voices later in life. Essays about the small moments that change everything. Stories that mattered to me rather than whatever paid the bills. Marcus listened to all of it, asking questions that made my ideas feel real and possible, rather than foolish fantasies. When I mentioned feeling like it was too late to pursue passion projects, he looked surprised. You are 32, not 92, he said with a laugh. Most of the best art comes from people who have actually lived enough to have something meaningful to say. Day 3 followed a similar pattern. Derek's morning inspection. My attempts to meet his impossible standards then escaped to Downtown Brew, where Marcus and I continued our conversations. This time he told me about his own struggles after his divorce 2 years earlier. His ex-wife had been controlling in ways that sounded disturbingly familiar. She had convinced him his teaching job was not prestigious enough, that his photography hobby was a waste of time, that he needed to change everything about himself to be worthy of her love. It took me months after she left to realize that the problem was not that I was not good enough, Marcus said. The problem was that she never intended to think I was good enough. Some people need to tear others down to feel powerful themselves. His words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. I made excuses for Derek, explaining that he just wanted me to reach my potential, that he was successful, and probably knew better than I did about these things. But even as I said it, I could hear how hollow it sounded. Marcus did not argue with me, or try to convince me of anything. He just listened, and occasionally shared his own experiences in a way that felt supportive rather than preachy. By day 4, I was looking forward to our conversations more than anything else in my life. Day 4 was when everything shifted. Marcus had invited me to see a photography exhibition at a small gallery downtown. I had told Derek I was networking with potential writing clients, which felt like the first outright lie I had told him in years. The guilt was overwhelming, but not enough to stop me from going. The exhibition was called Ordinary Magic, featuring Marcus's photographs alongside several other local artists. Walking through the gallery, seeing his work displayed professionally, I felt a surge of pride on his behalf that surprised me with its intensity. But it was not just Marcus's talent that moved me. It was the way he talked about his art, the passion and joy in his voice as he explained his creative process. This was what it looked like when someone pursued something they truly loved, rather than just enduring whatever paid the bills. One photograph in particular stopped me in my tracks. It showed an older woman sitting alone at a diner counter, coffee cup halfway to her lips, looking out a rain-streaked window. Something about her expression, peaceful but distant, reminded me of myself. But Marcus had captured her in a way that made her solitude look contemplative, rather than lonely, powerful, rather than abandoned. Beauty is not about perfection, Marcus said, noticing me studying the image. It is about authenticity. That woman had lived a full life, and every line on her face told part of her story. That is what makes her beautiful. I looked around the gallery at all these ordinary moments Marcus had transformed into art, simply by seeing them with compassion and creativity. For the first time in years, I felt beautiful myself. Not because of how I looked, but because someone was seeing me with the same generous perspective Marcus brought to his photography. As we walked back through the park afterward, Marcus stopped suddenly and asked if he could take my picture. I immediately started to protest, listing all the reasons I was not photogenic, especially not lately. But something about the golden hour light and the way Marcus was looking at me made me say yes. He took several shots of me sitting on the same bench where we had talked the day before. When he showed me the images on his camera, I almost cried. The woman in those photographs looked peaceful, thoughtful, alive. She looked like someone worth knowing, worth loving. That night I stared at Derek's list on the refrigerator and felt something I had not felt in years. Anger. Not at myself for failing to meet impossible standards, but at the situation that had convinced me these standards were reasonable in the first place. Day 5 started differently because I woke up feeling different. Something about seeing myself through Marcus's lens had awakened a part of me I thought Derek had successfully killed. When Derek did his usual morning inspection asking about my progress on his list, I found myself really looking at him for the first time in months. I saw a man who needed to control his wife's weight, earnings, and emotional state in order to feel secure in his marriage. A man who had isolated me from friends and family so thoroughly that I had forgotten what it felt like to have conversations that did not involve criticism or correction. A man who was threatened by my friendship with someone who saw value in me exactly as I was. Derek must have sensed the shift in my demeanor because he became more aggressive in his questioning. Where had I been spending so much time? Why was I not making more progress on his list? Did I understand that he could have any woman he wanted, that he was doing me a favor by giving me this chance to improve myself? For the first time in our marriage, I did not immediately apologize and promise to do better. Instead, I heard myself asking why he had married me in the first place if I was such a disappointment. The question seemed to catch him off guard, and for just a moment his controlled facade slipped. "Because you used to be different," he said. "You used to care about yourself, have ambition, make an effort. You used to be someone I could be proud to have on my arm." I spent the day thinking about that response while I went through the motions of his ridiculous tasks. When had I stopped caring about myself? When had my natural ambitions been redirected toward meeting Derek's approval instead of pursuing my own goals? When had I started believing that my worth was determined by whether someone else was proud to have me on their arm? By the time I met Marcus at our usual coffee shop that afternoon, I was ready to have a conversation I'd been avoiding. I told him about Derek's ultimatum, about the list of ways I needed to improve myself to remain worth keeping as a wife. Marcus's reaction was immediate and visceral. His face went through several emotions: disgust, anger, protective concern, before settling into something that looked like heartbreak. "Camila," he said quietly, "that is not how love works. People who love you do not make you audition to keep their affection." He told me about the end of his marriage, how his ex-wife had used similar tactics to keep him constantly trying to earn her approval. It had taken months of therapy after their divorce for him to understand that healthy relationships build you up rather than tear you down, that love should feel secure rather than precarious. You deserve someone who sees your worth. Marcus said, not someone who makes you prove it over and over again. You deserve someone who celebrates your successes instead of minimizing them, who supports your dreams instead of redirecting them toward their own needs. We sat in silence for a long time after that. I knew he was right, but knowing and being ready to act on that knowledge were two different things. I had invested 4 years in this marriage, reorganized my entire life around Derek's preferences, convinced myself that his love was worth the constant effort to earn it. But sitting next to Marcus, remembering how good it felt to be appreciated for who I was, rather than who I might become with enough modification, I started to imagine what my life could look like if I stopped trying to meet impossible standards. That evening, Derek noticed my distraction and demanded to know what was going on. When I tried to deflect, he became suspicious and started asking pointed questions about how I was spending my time. Eventually, he discovered that I had been meeting with a friend at the coffee shop. Friend Derek's voice was ice cold. "What friend? You do not have friends anymore. Remember? They were all bad influences holding you back from your potential. So who exactly have you been meeting with?" I found myself describing Marcus as casually as possible, just someone I had met while working on writing assignments, completely professional, nothing inappropriate. But Derek's lawyer training kicked in, and he started interrogating me like I was a hostile witness. How often had we met? What did we talk about? Had this person influenced my recent attitude problems? Did I realize how inappropriate it was for a married woman to be developing friendships with men without her husband's knowledge and approval? By the end of the conversation, Derek had convinced himself that my coffee shop meetings were evidence of infidelity, and he issued a new ultimatum: cut off all contact with this person immediately, or our marriage would be over before the 9 days were up. I went to bed that night feeling like I was being torn in half. On one side was everything I had built my life around for 4 years, the security of marriage and Derek's support, the familiarity of my role as his wife, even if that role had become smaller and smaller over time. On the other side was the possibility of being myself again, of pursuing work I cared about, of having friendships based on mutual respect, rather than one-sided improvement projects, of maybe someday being in a relationship where I felt valued rather than tolerated. Day 6 began with Derek informing me that he would be monitoring my activities more closely. He had realized he had been too trusting, giving me too much freedom to make poor decisions. From now on, I would need to account for my time more thoroughly. I felt like a teenager being grounded, except teenagers eventually grow up and move out. I was a grown woman who had somehow agreed to live like a prisoner in her own marriage. Despite Derek's new restrictions, I knew I had to meet Marcus one more time to explain why I could not see him anymore. I told Derek I was going to the library to work on writing assignments, which was not technically a lie since I planned to end the conversation with Marcus by actually going to the library afterward. Marcus took the news better than I expected, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Not disappointment in me, but disappointment for me. He did not try to talk me out of Derek's ultimatum, or argue that I should choose him instead. He simply said he understood that I had to make my own decisions about my marriage, and that he hoped I would be happy whatever I chose. "You deserve someone who sees your worth," he repeated. "Whether that is your husband learning to appreciate what he has, or someone new who recognizes your value from the beginning. Just please do not forget what I saw in you these past few days, because it was real, and it was wonderful." As I walked away from that conversation, something crystallized in my mind with perfect clarity. Derek had not given me 9 days to prove I was worth keeping. He had given me 9 days to remember that I was worth keeping, period, regardless of anyone else's opinion. Day 7 was when everything came into sharp focus. I woke up early, and instead of immediately thinking about Derek's list, I thought about Marcus's words. "You deserve someone who sees your worth." Not someone who might eventually see it if you work hard enough to reveal it, but someone who already recognizes it. I spent the morning researching something I had never thought to investigate before: emotional abuse. What I found made my stomach sick and my heart race in equal measure. The isolation from friends and family. The constant criticism disguised as help. The financial control. The requirement to earn love and approval through meeting impossible standards. The gaslighting that convinced me his behavior was normal and my reactions were the problem. Derek was not just a difficult husband or a perfectionist. He was systematically dismantling my sense of self-worth in order to maintain control over me. And I had been so desperate to be a good wife that I had helped him do it. That afternoon, while Derek was at work, I did something I had not done in over a year. I called my sister Sarah. We had barely spoken since my wedding, because Derek always found reasons why I was too busy to visit, or why my family was too demanding of my time and energy. Sarah cried when she heard my voice. She had been worried about me for months, she said, but Derek always answered my phone and made excuses about why I could not talk. She had even driven to our apartment once, but Derek told her I was not feeling well and did not want visitors. Talking to Sarah reminded me of who I used to be before Derek convinced me that version of myself was inadequate. I had been confident, social, ambitious. I had friends who enjoyed my company and family who loved me unconditionally. I had dreams and opinions, and a sense of humor Derek had systematically discouraged as inappropriate or unattractive. When Derek came home that evening, he could sense something had shifted. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop working on something that was clearly not related to his improvement list. "What is this?" he asked, looking at my screen, where I had been drafting an email to a literary magazine about submitting some personal essays. "I am working on my writing," I said simply. "Real writing about things that matter to me." Derek's face darkened. "This is not the time for hobby projects," he said. "You have 6 days left to meet very specific requirements. This is exactly the kind of lack of focus that got you into this situation in the first place." I looked at him carefully, this man I had spent 4 years trying to please, and realized I felt nothing. Not love, not fear, not even anger anymore. Just a vast, clear-eyed understanding of what my life had become and what it could be if I chose something different. "What situation is that?" "Derek," I asked calmly. "The situation where my husband decided I am not worth loving unless I lose weight, make more money, and stop having opinions of my own. The situation where I've been isolated from everyone who cares about me so thoroughly that I forgot what healthy relationships look like." That situation. Derek was clearly not expecting this response. He tried several of his usual tactics, reminding me how much he had sacrificed for our marriage, how other women would be grateful for his attention and support, how my recent attitude proved he had been right to give me this ultimatum. But I had done my research that morning. I recognized these manipulation strategies now, and they no longer had power over me. Instead of arguing or defending myself, I simply said, "I will not be participating in this anymore." "What does that mean?" Derek demanded. "It means I am done trying to earn something I should have had freely from the beginning. It means I am filing for divorce." The silence that followed was deafening. Derek went through the stages of manipulator grief in real time. First disbelief, then anger, then attempted bargaining, then threats about what divorce would cost me financially and socially. Through it all, I sat calmly at the kitchen table, feeling more centered than I had in years. I had already contacted a lawyer that afternoon, a woman who specialized in cases involving emotional and financial abuse. I had already moved money Derek did not know about into a separate account, my freelance earnings from before our marriage, that I had never closed. I had already arranged to stay with Sarah while I looked for my own apartment. Derek's true colors emerged completely that night. The mask of concerned husband fell away, revealing someone who saw me as property rather than a partner. His rage was terrifying but also clarifying. This was who he had always been underneath the charm and gifts and promises. I had just been too desperate to be loved to see it clearly. Day 8 was moving day. Derek had left early for work after a night of alternating between threats and desperate promises to change. I packed everything that mattered to me, which turned out to be surprisingly little. Most of the expensive items in our apartment were things Derek had chosen, gifts that came with strings attached or purchases made to meet his standards, rather than my preferences. What I took were my books, my writing materials, photos from before my marriage, and a few pieces of clothing that felt like me, rather than the version of me Derek preferred. Everything fit in my car with room to spare. I left Derek's list on the kitchen counter with a note. I spent 4 years thinking I was not enough. It took 9 days to realize I was always enough for the right person. I deserve someone who sees my worth without making me prove it. I am choosing to be that person for myself. 3 months later, I was sitting in the same corner table at Downtown Brew, but everything else had changed. My laptop screen showed a freelance writing contract for more money than I had ever earned in a single month, working with clients who valued my perspective and voice, rather than just needing content produced cheaply. Marcus walked in right on time for our lunch date, carrying a portfolio of new photographs he wanted to show me. Our friendship had developed slowly and naturally into something deeper after my divorce was finalized. He never pressured me to move faster than I was ready for, never made me feel like I owed him anything for his support during the difficult months of rebuilding my life. We had been officially dating for 6 weeks, but it felt both brand new and completely comfortable. Marcus celebrated my successes without taking credit for them, supported my goals without redirecting them toward his own needs, and somehow made me feel beautiful on days when I wore sweatpants and had not brushed my hair. The freelance writing I had dismissed as hobby projects during my marriage had turned into a thriving business once I started writing about subjects I actually cared about. My essays about finding yourself after emotional abuse had been published in 3 different magazines, generating enough positive response to lead to more assignment offers than I could accept. I had reconnected with college friends Derek had convinced me to abandon, joined a writing group that met weekly at the local library, and started seeing a therapist who helped me understand how I had lost myself so completely, and how to make sure it never happened again. My apartment was small and furnished mostly with secondhand finds, but every item in it was something I had chosen because I loved it. No expensive gifts with hidden price tags, no decorations selected to impress visitors I was not allowed to have anyway. Just a space that felt like home, because it was completely authentically mine. Derek had tried to contact me dozens of times in the months after I moved out. His messages followed a predictable pattern from anger to attempted bargaining, to fake apologies to threats about what leaving him would cost me socially and financially. I blocked his number after the fourth week and asked my lawyer to handle all communication. According to Sarah, who occasionally ran into Derek's colleagues at professional events, he was not handling the divorce well. He had been telling people I had cheated on him with Marcus, that I had abandoned our marriage for a fling with someone beneath my social status. The irony of Derek worrying about social status, when he was the one who had demanded I audition for love, was not lost on me. But Derek's opinion of my choices no longer had any power over my emotional state. I had learned the difference between someone who loved me and someone who loved the control they had over me. I had remembered what it felt like to be valued for who I was, rather than who I might become with enough modification. Marcus looked up from his portfolio and caught me smiling. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. I was thinking about how that 9-day ultimatum was supposed to break me down, but instead it set me free, I said. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is the clarity to walk away. Marcus reached across the table and took my hand. "Derek probably thought he was teaching you a lesson about your worth," he said. "Instead, he taught you something much more valuable. He taught you that your worth was never up for debate in the first place." The healing process had not been easy or quick. There were days when I missed the financial security of being married to Derek, when I questioned whether I had given up too easily on our marriage, when the loneliness felt overwhelming. But even on the hardest days, I never once regretted choosing to value myself enough to walk away from someone who did not. I learned that healthy love feels secure rather than precarious, builds you up rather than tears you down, celebrates your successes rather than minimizing them. I learned that the right person would never make me audition for affection I should have received freely. Most importantly, I learned that I could provide that secure building celebratory love for myself when no one else was available to offer it. 6 months after Derek's ultimatum, I ran into him at a bookstore downtown. He looked older, stressed, and his usual confident demeanor seemed forced. He tried to strike up a conversation asking how I was doing, mentioning that he had heard about my writing success through mutual acquaintances. "You look good," he said, and I could hear the surprise in his voice. "Happy." I thanked him politely and started to walk away, but he called after me. "Camila, wait. I think maybe I made some mistakes in our marriage. Maybe we could talk sometime. Work things out." I turned back to look at this man who had spent 4 years convincing me I was not enough, who had given me 9 days to prove my worth to him, who was now seeing the confident, successful woman I had become without his input, and wanted to take credit for my transformation. "Derek," I said gently, "I hope you find someone who makes you happy. But that person is not me, and it never was. I am exactly who I was always meant to be. You just could not see it." As I walked away, I felt nothing but gratitude for the ultimatum that had forced me to choose myself over someone else's opinion of my value. That 9-day countdown had been meant as punishment, but it became the catalyst for the most important decision of my life. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever stayed in a relationship where you felt like you had to constantly prove your worth? What finally gave you the courage to choose yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about finding your strength in difficult situations, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they are already enough exactly as they are. Remember, you deserve love that feels secure, not love that feels like a performance review. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is show you who they really are so you can choose what you truly deserve.